Good morning. Welcome to church. It's good to be here with you all. Let's start our worship this morning by singing like we always do. If you turn to number 115 in Voices Together, Praise Be to God. So we're going to do something a little different this morning. I'd like to invite the children to head back to the back of the church now to get ready for the candlelight procession in a few moments. If the rest of you will stand and turn to number 76 in Voices Together, Holy, Holy, Holy. This is a really traditional one. I think we know this one pretty well. Can you give me a C?
Good morning and welcome to First Mennonite on this wonderful Sunday morning as we gather here for a time of reflection and renewal. My name is Glenda Kaufman. I'll be the worship leader this morning. I grew up here at First Mennonite, so I've really gone here my whole life. And after college, came back with my husband Jeff, and we raised our two grown sons, Brennan and Nathan, here as well. So this is pretty much, except for a little time in college, always been my church home. So always glad to be here. That's it for the welcome. So we'll go on to the some announcements. First, as far as the offering, remember that there is a QR code in your bulletin if you like to give that way, or you can give online. And there's also a box in the back where you can drop off your offering as well. I don't have a copy of the announcements, so I'm going to look at the screen. Okay, evidently there's a quilt and craft retreat coming up at, I think, at camp. So if people are wanting to go down there. Oh, sorry, it's here. Sorry. Do you want to say anything about that, Angie?
Sorry, Angie Knopfseger. So it's the Quilt and Craft Retreat, and as you can see, it's Friday and Saturday, January 27, 28, here in the Community Center. You can RSVP to me or give me a call. I've got about 7 or 8 ladies who have signed up for that. So it'll be basically from like 9 in the morning till 4 in the afternoon both days, and people can bring their own lunch. We're just this first time doing that here for those folks in the Denver area, and so we hope it's a good turnout and people enjoy and we can sit and talk.
All right. Thank you, Angie. Sorry about that. Yes, so on February 5th, the PCRC is going to be holding an adult education class. This one I do know about because I'm on the PCRC. And we're going to be discussing some of the feedback that we've received from the mountain groups that have met for the last, I think they started in May, discussing things like Claudia's departure and some other discussion things. So we're going to be sharing the response that we've received from that on that Sunday in Adult Ed. And there are our dates for our upcoming Sunday school classes for the kids. So the one this month will be next week. There is Sunday school for the kids. As well as there are the MYF dates. And more of those, so sorry. Yeah, you can just read those. And again, we hope that you will join us after the church today for fellowship time. Also, upcoming dates, just real quick want to mention, next Sunday, Glenn, our pastor, will be back, so he'll be preaching next Sunday. And then on the 29th, the service will be a Taizé service led by Charlie. So just, we wanted to point that out for people so you know that that's a special Sunday that's coming up. And yes, there's still lots of ways to get involved, and I think Nikki wanted to let you tag in on that one.
Good morning. My name is Nikki Candle Lind, and I'm currently the leader for the technology team here at First Mennonite Church. We have a great team assembled right now. It includes a couple of father-son teams running the live stream and audio. It includes a teacher, Kim, who's working with us. We've got a lot of new members, but the truth of the matter is that this equipment that we purchased to make the live streams happen requires more human power to run than we currently have available. So I just want to really encourage you that if you have even the slightest interest in learning how to run the live stream, the projector, or the sound system, or if you know of a person who might be willing to come to church once a month and learn how to do those things, now would be an awesome time for you to send me an email. Send an email to Carlene at admin@fmc.org. Contact somebody and let them know if you're willing to even do once a month or once every 6 weeks. It would be really, really helpful for our team. Thanks so much.
All right, so we'll go ahead and start with the procession with the kids.
job. Good morning. We have a new friend with us this morning, and I'm so happy to have you. So, my name is Barb, and I have a book this morning. It's called The Story of Ruby Bridges. Do you know that story? It's such a great story, right? In the inside of the book, it says, "Our Ruby taught us all a lot. She became someone who helped change our country. She was a part of history. She was 6 years old. So she was a part of history just like generals and presidents, their leaders, but so was Ruby. She led us away from hate, and she led us near to knowing each other, the white folks and the black folks." So this was a little girl. Here's a picture of her. You see her? So she was a little girl. She was 6 years old, and she lived in Mississippi. And in those years, little black children and little white children didn't go to the same school. And we knew that needed to change. But to have that change, it had to be decided in a courtroom. So together in the courtroom, the judge decided, we need to change this, right? And so they had 4 little girls that they said should go to white schools, that they should integrate the schools so people would go together. So 3 of them went to one school, and poor Ruby was the only one to go to a different school. And her parents were worried about it, right? Here's a picture of them in church, and they were all really praying that it would go well, praying for Ruby, right? So the first days she had to go to school, the white people weren't very nice. They were mean. They were yelling at her. It must have been really scary to have to walk through all those people with people yelling at them. And she walked to the school, and she had to be surrounded by police officers, essentially. And they would walk with her to the school, and she would hurry through the crowd, and she wouldn't say anything. She just would walk through quickly. And then she was in school all by herself, because the children, the parents of the white children didn't want her to mix with them, and so they didn't even send their children. So she was learning in a classroom all by herself. There's a picture of her teacher. And she worked really hard, and she learned. And then one day, the teacher watched her from the window as she was coming to the school building. And all these people were they were mad, and they were yelling. And it must have been so scary. And she stopped. She stopped in front of them, and the police officers were trying to get her to move, but she wouldn't move. She just stood there. And her teacher saw her moving her lips like she was talking to them, but she couldn't tell what she was saying. And then she walked in. And when she came in the door, her teacher said, "What were you saying to the crowd?" And she said, I wasn't talking. I was praying. I was praying for them. Every morning, Ruby had stopped a few blocks away from the school to say a prayer for the people who hated her. And this morning she had forgot until she was already in the middle of the angry crowd of people. This is what she prayed. Please, God, try to forgive those people, because even if they say those bad things, they don't know what they're doing. So you could forgive them, just like you did those folks a long time ago when they said terrible things about you. So that's amazing, right? She just stopped and prayed for them. So I think that's a really cool thing, right? She was so brave. The only thing I would add to that is if something that scary was happening to you, or anytime somebody is trying to hurt you, it's super important to tell an adult that you trust, right? Praying is a super good thing to do, and using your words to tell an adult how you feel or what happened is super important. But Ruby Bridges was an amazing girl, and she was only 6. Some of you are her age, some of you are bigger, some of you are younger. But when you're a kid, there's a lot you can do to change the world. Okay, thank you for coming up. You can return to the people who brought you.
As I was preparing for this morning and reading over the call to worship, I thought about a verse from the book of Esther. Queen Esther is asked to approach the king to help save the Jews. And she is afraid because the queen before her, when she approached the king and defied him, was expelled. So she's afraid, but her uncle told her in Esther 4, verse 14, "And who knows but that you have come to royal position for such a time as this." I think it's easy to think that the same thing about some of these civil rights leaders, that they were in the right place at the right time, that they were born for that place that they're at. And we'll be talking and remembering about some of these specific people this morning. But I also challenge us all as we read the call to worship this morning and as we go forward here today this week to be aware of those opportunities that we have the chance to act and make a difference, both big and small, and to encourage ourselves by thinking, perhaps I am here for such a time as this. Now, please join me in the printed call to worship. I will read the light print, and you can respond with the dark. And as it says, this was written by Reverend Eric Thomas. The prophet Micah told us that the Lord requires us to do justice, love kindness, and walk humbly with God. As we remember Martin Luther King's witness, let us be called to worship by some of the prophets of the civil rights movement. In 1963, in his challenging letter to complacent white clergy in the South, Dr. King wrote, "We will have to repent in this generation, not merely for the vitriolic words and actions of the bad people, but for the appalling silence of the good people. In the end, we will remember not the words of our enemies, but the silence of our friends." President John F. Kennedy, in an address that led to the Civil Rights Act of 1964, said, "The heart of the question is whether all Americans are to be afforded equal rights and equal opportunities, whether we are going to treat our fellow Americans as we want to be treated." Rosa Parks said, "You must never be fearful about what you are doing when it is right. I have learned over the years that when one's mind is made up, this diminishes fear. Knowing what must be done does away with fear." Anne Braden, a white Southern activist and ally of the civil rights movement, wrote, "In every age, no matter how cruel the oppression carried on by those in power, there have been those who struggled for a different world. I believe this is the genius of humankind, the thing that makes us half divine, the fact that some human beings can envision a world that has never existed." So please join me now in the invocation. Has been adapted from a quote from Dorothy Day. God of justice, we confess that in the pursuit of our own dreams and desires, we have not always been civil, not always humane, not always right. Guided by your Spirit, what we would like to do is change the world. Make it a little simpler for people to feed, clothe, and shelter themselves as you intended them to do. Help us to be your witnesses by fighting for better conditions, by crying out unceasingly for the rights of the workers, the poor, of the destitute, the rights of the worthy and the unworthy poor, so that we can, with your help, change the world. Enlarge our hearts to love each other, to love our neighbor, and to love our enemy as our friend. Amen.
Invite you to turn to number 680, in the Voices Together. Call me, Lord. We will do this one 2 times.
Our scripture reading this morning is Luke chapter 6, verse 35. But love your enemies, do good to them, and lend to them without expecting to get anything back. Then your reward will be great, and you will be children of the Most High, because he is kind to the ungrateful and wicked.
Good morning. My name's Jonathan Moyer, and I've been attending First Mennonite here in Denver since about 2005. So these days I'm here with my wife, Gail, our little baby, Evelyn, and our child, Elias, as well. So it's really great to be here. I wanted to start and just say, this is not my comfort zone. I've never done this before, and so, Pastor Glenn asked me, and while he's on his little sabbatical, and so I hope I make him as proud as a Mennonite pastor can be in a space like this. so like a little proud. Okay, let's pray. Creator of all things, bless this sermon, and may it inspire us to be more, live more, and love more. The Bible verse today talks about loving your enemies. And I was raised in a church that believed this verse to be absolutely true, trying to live it daily. We are to love our enemies and pray for those who persecute us. We are to live into the Christ example fully. But what following this Bible verse actually looked like was a world where we didn't seem to have enemies. How can you have enemies if you're a Christian, let alone a Mennonite? How can you have enemies if you follow Jesus? My enemies growing up were at a vast distance. They were mythical. I remember the first Gulf War. I was 11 at the time, watching in the basement of my house on CNN as jet fighters took off from a ship and cruise missiles lobbed towards Baghdad. I learned there was nationalism and war, and it was thrilling and terrifying. It was the violence of a sovereign state with the proliferation of yellow ribbons. I remember even earlier learning about the MOVE fires in Philadelphia. The fires were the result of the Philadelphia police trying to evict members of an urban movement that yearned for a different way of living outside the system, a vision of in the world and not of the world. The police used machine guns, helicopters, bags of TNT to light a city block on fire, with the police chief famously retorting, "Let it burn," when the fire took hold, killed 11 people, including 5 children, and burned 61 homes. I was very young, but remember it clearly on television. And I also have memories because my grandfather delivered chicken and eggs in the city, and the block was on his route, and I would ride with him and see the charred buildings. There I learned I learned about police, race, and society. I learned again about the violence of a sovereign state. I eventually learned about social structures, the ways in which society is organized, and how historical systems of oppression seem to reify themselves today. They were my enemy, no? But it wasn't at all clear that the community I grew up in understood how to treat enemies, and even acknowledging their existence seemed to show a weakness in our faith journey, a shortcoming that was kind of sinful. How do you love your enemies if you can't identify them? The Mennonite faith calls us to be a silent and radical presence in the world. I'm drawn to this church because of this worldview. It's a worldview that separates Mennonites from the broader Christian church, which can often feel a bit worldly. I believe that the radical view of how to act in the world has a few interconnected pieces that you can see in today's Bible verse. First, it's an upside-down view of how one should treat those who you oppose and those who oppose you. You're supposed to love those who actively work against you, the common definition of an enemy. This is one verse that points to the logic that underpins Mennonite pacifism, for example. See, the most radical calls, it requires you to be willing to lay down your own life instead of taking the life of your enemy. This flies in the face of almost any movie, cultural hero, or the way Jesus is treated in mainline Christianity. It's a call for a view of the self that is limited. The self isn't something that needs protecting at the expense of others. It's a call for an understanding of faith deeply rooted in notions of community. It's not that God lives through you. It's that God lives through us. Community is the beginning and the end of the Mennonite faith, and the call to be pacifist speaks directly to this. The radical call of the Mennonite church, the call to be a selfless lover of your enemies, is criticized for reasons that are both good and bad. First, you have bad and selfish reasons to challenge the logic that are rooted in individualism and ego. I'm going to dismiss those in the name of Christ. Second, you have better reasons to be concerned about the radical call to your enemies that are based on positions of privilege and power. It's widely presumptuous of us to assume that, as a wealthy, very white congregation with lots of material resources, that we would be protected by the structural drivers of violence that would never allow us to actually need to experience the challenge of living out this prophetic and radical view of the world. The police, the citizens on patrol, come ready, willing, and often all too able to use their deadly force as a way of propping up our privilege. How can we call on others to fight violence in their lives with a willingness to lay down their lives for the enemy? How can we ask someone else to live out that reality when they don't have the privilege we have? And the privilege we have is shielding us, often using violence on a daily basis. How can we love our enemies if we continue to protect ourselves? This is MLK Weekend, a time to remember and reflect on the life of a remarkable person at a remarkable point in history. The Reverend Dr. King was famously murdered in Memphis, Tennessee, while he stood on the second-floor balcony of the Lorraine Motel. Before he died, he gave a speech on loving your enemies, saying that darkness cannot drive darkness. Only light can do that. Hate cannot drive out hate. Only love can do that. I remember getting a text from my friend, Erin Sharp, in 2017 because her brother was missing. Her brother, Michael Sharp, was leading a UN group investigating war crimes in the Eastern Congo. He had taken a detour to investigate some murders of children that were potentially kidnapped. This started a long and painful journey to find out what happened. He was killed along with 2 colleagues, and there was a deep suspicion that the government was involved. I hate the people who did this to MJ, to his family, and to his friends. I hate what they took away from this world and the hurt that they caused. But who is my enemy? The people who carried out the actions? The people who orchestrated it, those covering it up? The Congolese government? The Belgian colonizers who murdered the first democratically elected leader in 1961 with the blessing of this government? The genocide in Rwanda, which still contributes to the instability in the East? The large companies that use the country as a commodity, treating her people like dirt. The red dirt Michael lay on after he was shot. Here, I learned about the pain of losing a friend and the power of human suffering. Who was I supposed to hate when I stumbled upon a video of the murder one Saturday morning in my office? Who was my enemy? How can I love my enemy when they are everywhere and nowhere at the same time? I've often thought about Dirk Willems when I think about MJ, MLK, or my Mennonite faith. I think most people know the Dirk story, which is of a new convert to Anabaptism who is arrested because he doesn't work well for the state and is jailed, escapes, runs across a frozen body of water. His jailer follows, falls into the water. Dirk continues to escape, but Dirk doesn't escape. He returns, rescues the person, is apprehended, and burned at the stake. Does loving your enemies mean you have to be irrational? I think there's another thread in Mennonite thinking that's powerful. It's the rejection of worldly rationality and the embrace of mystery. The church is full of examples of this. Whether it's choosing pastors by lot, a random process that isn't necessarily set to give you the most logical result, or the pacifism thing, or the willing rejection of technology in some communities. It's all a rejection of rationality in the world. When I first started attending this church, I used to look at the sculpture on the wall over here on the piano side and try to figure out what it meant. Here's my interpretation. It's a clock, but the Spirit cuts through that clock, destroys and changes the fundamental character of time, the way we organize our lives in this world. I think that's what Jesus asks us to do in a verse like this, to love our enemies, to reject the rationality of the world, and to live an upside-down kingdom, to build the kingdom in the world today. I also think that this verse speaks to the importance of subsuming the individual to the broader group in the church. I think this is a part of the kingdom logic. It speaks to the importance of the group at the expense of the individual. It speaks to how you can reject your own self because the group can live without you. It speaks to the rejection of proselytizing, telling others how they should live, and it takes an individual faith and it makes it part of a collective faith, both reinforcing it and making it more resilient. My individual acceptance of Jesus is meaningless without the community. How should one take the position that you should love your enemies? I think enemies can be chosen. And many of you have enemies that work against you, be they political, social, or familial. I think the logic of this verse suggests you should probably do everything you can to try to love these people. Like actively imagine loving these people. So for some people, I think you have political enemies, right? I think there are political figures that loom large in our lives. For example, there may be a former president whose explicit racism, sexism, and misogyny and boorishness, right, really gets you under the skin, and you visualize that kind of person as a kind of enemy. I think that's a solvable problem, and that's an easy thing to do with a verse like this. Imagine that person, their porcine figure glistening in an empty room, and imagine all the love of the universe pointed directly at them. Do that over and over again until they no longer plague you as an enemy. Hating politicians is a waste of your time and does not build the kingdom. But there are other ways to have enemies that I have no real guidance about, and this is where I struggle in something like this. I would suggest many of us have unseen enemies. For example, I've messed up human relationships. I've caused people hurt and harm. I've made people feel small, insignificant, and bad about themselves. I spend so much of my time worrying about what other people think about me and what harm I've caused them. I often think we ignore the enemy within ourselves. I know that I sabotage myself in large and small ways that work against who I want to be in this world, in community, trying to build a kingdom. Whether it's small things like eating poorly or drinking too much, or big things like being unwilling to love myself, being unwilling to see the good in myself. Loving that enemy, loving yourself, might be one of the hardest things to do. How do you love your enemy if it's you? Your enemies are the things that work against you in this world. They are the people, the places, the things, or yourself. They are the things that do not allow us to live our best and highest good, and we all have them individually, but we also have them as a group. But we are called into community by God to live lives of justice and peace, eschewing the siren song of the individual to embrace another logic, a logic that's out of this world, that might not make sense to the world, but that makes sense to the kingdom. And in the name of God, may we struggle to build the kingdom eternally, loving our enemies, loving ourselves, and walking humbly together, never ceasing to struggle in this and being willing to lay down our lives for those who would do us harm. Not because it will make the world better, but because it is our solemn obligation. Amen.
We're going to close our service this morning by singing a couple of hymns that are so deeply ingrained into the African American ethos that anytime any of us hear these, that's what we think about. One of the beauties of being retired is that I have lots of time on my hands to do silly things like research some of these hymns. The first hymn we're going to sing, Lift Every Voice and Sing, was actually written, I mean, if you ask most people, I think most people would suggest that this hymn was written in the 60s in response to the civil rights movement. This hymn was written in 1900 as a response to the African American, the way they were being treated at that time. And it's one that has been used a lot now. In fact, Romain was telling me that growing up, he went to a school where one of the things that they were required to do was to learn this and memorize this song. The second one we're going to sing, Total Praise, was actually was not written until 1969. It was written by a pastor down in Selma, Alabama, in response to the death of his wife, his mother, and a grandmother, all within a month or two. And he was writing it as a lament. And as he continued to write it, it turned into this incredible piece of music, this song of praise that I think really reflects a lot of what the African American community believes and is going through. And so I just think it's cool to hear it, to think about where some of these songs come from in their history and how they've impacted our communities and our societies as we go. So I invite you to stand and turn to number 611. Lift every voice and sing. Lift your voice and let this one be sung.
May we live together, work together, and love together. May we remember the martyrs, reject the logic of this world, and build the logic of the kingdom. Go forth and love thyself.
Number 633, total, voices together, total praise. We'll do this twice.
Christ.